Gaming isn't like how it used to be, and it's all going downhill. This argument has been a major part of gaming discourse for years, decades even, yet somehow in 2026, it's completely inescapable. And truly, it would be naive to just slap on a smile and say that actually everything is totally chill and like normal. It's not. There's a lot of fear and anger in the industry right now among game devs and gamers alike. Much of the angst here focuses on a generational divide in gaming. In other words, some people fear this divide as the end of classical gaming, or the end of gaming on a PC or console itself. The evidence in the industry and broader economy tells a much weirder story, however. Gaming is threatened, sure. But if the industry continues to flail, it will be less a story of financial mismanagement. Instead, it will be much more of a story about how we all collectively failed to understand what got us into gaming in the first place. If we're going to nostalgia wash everything and insist that nothing is as good as ye good old days, let's take a step back and consider what the good old days actually looked like. Obviously, this looks differently to different people depending on how old you are and when you got into gaming. I'm going to use an approximation of my own experiences as a frame of reference. If my audience demographics are at all accurate, there's a good chance you will relate to this retelling. The year is 2000. Justin Timberlake and Britney Spears are actively dating. Buffy the Vampire Slayer's 5th season is airing on TV for the first time ever. The dot-com bubble is all around us, yet few of us are actually aware of it. Certainly not you, because you're a child with a very small brain. In short, the internet as we currently know it in 2026 is quite literally not yet invented in 2000. In this technocultural moment, your parents, not you, an important point, are savvy enough to buy the Game Boy Color on sale during Black Friday. Normally this thing costs at least $69 in 2000 money, but they got it at a steep discount for like $50. They bought you 1 or 2 games to go with it, maybe 3 if you were lucky. For the next several birthdays, Christmases, or whatever other holidays your family celebrates, you are thrilled when you get one more Game Boy Color game as a gift. You proceed to plug these cartridges in and juice them for every ounce that they are worth. You will play the same game over and over and over again, in part because you want to, but in part because you have to. As a literal child, you have basically no money, no cultural autonomy, and therefore no control over your game library. You stay up playing these games until midnight with the bedroom light on because backlighting was too fancy for such a technology in the early 2000s. There are other sources of entertainment that compete for your attention, mostly physical toys, TV shows, movies, and socializing with other kids. School is an important part of your life, and maybe there's an after-school sport that you play. But aside from that and a bit of homework, you get to do more or less whatever you want in unstructured play in the evenings. If you're even luckier, your parents will continue to buy the occasional console for you over the years, especially if you have any siblings you can share it with. Sometimes your friends come over for a sleepover, and you all play the same game on that console for hours. Maybe one of those friends also gets a console, and playing a game like Halo with your friends is your first foray into violent video games. The family desktop PC that lives in the dining room, living room, or office has a few games like Freddy Fish or SimCity 3000, or whatever wildly goofy game adaptation of that year's biggest kids movie. Through these experiences, you get to learn your preferences for different genres and playstyles. As you mature, so do your tastes. You likely carry some of those same opinions into 2026. If hearing this story makes you realize that this whole scenario is contingent on a lot of things existing or not existing, then you would be correct. Let's start with the very obvious, yet most overlooked aspect of the development of the gamer. This is one of the things that has to exist for you to be able to be a gamer. Money, and more specifically, the money your parents have. Gaming is an expensive hobby, and it always has been. I personally was lucky enough to have parents who could afford a Game Boy Color, yes, on Black Friday sale. The first static console I got was a PlayStation 1 from a friend for free when her parents got her a PlayStation 2 for Christmas. If somehow you are listening to this, Madison, you are a total goat for doing that, by the way. My ability to game and learn more about gaming actually suffered later in life when my family became too poor to keep up with newer consoles. Years and years later in life, I eventually had the adult paycheck needed to finally get back into gaming. And I'm not gonna lie, it's been great. I often think about the fragility of this history though. If gaming hadn't been a really formative early childhood experience for me, enabled by my parents who had money at the time, I don't know that I ever would have gotten into gaming, period. That's especially true as a woman, representing a demographic that historically has been more hesitant to get into gaming and also to spend money on games. Obviously that trend has been less true over time, but let me tell you, being a girl who was into video games back in the 2000s was definitely more of a novelty, to say the least. Regardless of gender or time period, it is fundamentally true that the gaming habits you develop early in life will dictate your preferences and consumer habits later. Money, usually from parents of children, enables those habits. So what about all of the kids of the past, now adults, who weren't lucky enough to have wealthier parents who could afford games and consoles. What about the children of today, stuck in the same situation? Money is a considerable barrier to the pipeline of gamers of today and tomorrow. If you care about where gaming is headed, and especially if you care about classical gaming going the way of it in favor of mobile, free-to-play, or platformless gaming, then this is something you need to think about. I'm not just talking about what gaming costs you, but what the cost of gaming means to children and teens. Especially in 2026, there's the sense that gaming has never been more expensive. At anywhere from $400 to $650, the latest generation of consoles feels more like you're buying a small computer than what used to be branded as a fancy toy. Interestingly, when you compare the nominal prices of various consoles over time to their real prices, in other words, adjusting for inflation, this situation doesn't seem as bleak. Depending on what prices you're looking at in the past, gaming has often gotten cheaper over time. I know what you're thinking right now. Come on, Soso, there's no way that $80 games are cheaper than ever. Here's what Matthew Ball, a well-regarded games financial analyst, has to say about that per his 2025 report. This chart takes a historical perspective. Back in the 80s and even the early 90s, games were astronomically expensive in real terms. Gaming was also much more of a niche hobby back then. The launch of affordable games on affordable consoles, such as the Game Boy series in the late 90s, did a lot to open the doors of gaming to more children, therefore creating more lifelong gamers. The prices of consoles themselves have also been fairly stable over the years. The aforementioned Game Boy Color launched at $69 in November 1998, which translates to $140.11 in April 2026 dollars. Admittedly, $140 is quite a bit less than the current gen handheld consoles from Nintendo, but the technological capabilities of a Game Boy Color and a Switch are quite different. Other consoles tell more of this story. Still, somehow, over 20 years later, the PlayStation 2 is the best-selling console of all time. It launched at $299 in October 2000. This amounts to $572.26 in April 2026 dollars. For comparison, the PlayStation 5 launched in November 2020. It ran either $399 for the digital version or $499 for the disc version. These prices equate to $510.61 and $628.58 respectively in current dollars. So the humble PlayStation 2 actually costs more than the cheaper version of the latest gen PlayStation in real terms. That's kind of a wild story. So why then does gaming seem so expensive if it technically isn't? That's because paradoxically, despite the stasis or even decline in real prices of games and consoles, they have gotten more expensive, just not in a way that gets reflected in prices. I'm going to show you some more graphs that help depict what I mean here. When you look at wage growth adjusted for inflation, Americans are making basically the same amount of money they did back in 2020. This same issue of stagnant real wages actually stretches back to the 1960s. That's right. Despite monumental gains in worker productivity, meaning how much work gets done per worker per hour, usually translating to companies, so employers making more profit, American workers continue to make the same amount of money they have since the 1960s. These charts look at just US data, but a similar situation is playing out for many demographic groups worldwide, including some in the UK, Japan, and Canada. More acutely, spikes in inflation brought on by data centers, tariffs, and especially the war in Iran have meant that recent inflation has actually started to outpace US wage growth. Gamers are highly aware of this, with the prices of nearly every PC component, and even consoles themselves, rising significantly in recent months. We can debate how much of this is justified versus companies just using the pretense of inflation to raise prices. Regardless, the effect is the same. A lot of this recent inflation is just starting to show up in the data, too. We won't know the full picture of this inflationary chapter for months to come. With how the US government keeps feeding the war and the AI bubble both, it might just get worse. Aside from mediocre wages, the employment rate has recently stagnated and even started to decline among certain age groups in the United States. The youth coming out of high school and college are the hardest hit, but even some more mid and late career layoffs are occurring, especially in the tech sector. So wages are historically stagnant. Recent inflation is bigger than whatever little wage growth we do have, and even the jobs numbers are bad. The culmination of these factors help to explain this graph, which shows that US consumer sentiment, so how happy consumers are with the economy, is so bad in the 2020s. If you really stop to consider this graph in its totality, it's shocking. The rapid drops in consumer sentiment in the 2020s do not fit the pattern in the rest of this graph. You would think that we were in a terrible recession right now because of how bad these numbers are. As of this moment in time, we aren't technically in a recession as far as we know. Again, data is slow to get published, so these dips here are really concerning. I realize I've gone off on a bit of a tangent here to give you some economic background on the pipeline of gamers. I told you at the outset that it's a weird story, and I need graphs and numbers to be able to tell it. If you're not buckled up for it, well, That sounds like a skill issue. Anyway, back to the children. The harsh reality is that you need to convert non-gamers into being gamers if you want gaming to survive as an industry. Gamers grow up, get old, and die. It's a cruel but inescapable fact. Children are the best demographic for that conversion. They have brains like soft Play-Doh. They are impressionable and easily excited. More importantly, games are meant to be played, you know, like toys, so it makes sense to market games to children. Here's the deal. Children famously do not have money. The way they acquire games and consoles is through their parents or sometimes other family members. The parents of today are stuck in the nightmare that is this economy. If they lose their jobs or prices rise too much, do you think they will keep spending money on consoles and games for their children? There is a lot of panic in the industry right now about how Gen Z and Gen Alpha aren't spending money on games and instead are opting for low-cost or free-to-play games. There has actually been a huge collapse among Gen Z on spending on entertainment, including gaming, in the last year or so. Huh? You mean the same time as all this crazy inflation and record low consumer sentiment? What a coincidence. These generational trends of paying less for gaming contrast with the fact that more people than ever identify as gamers. Gen Z and Gen Alpha are actually spending more time gaming than they have in the past. The way I view this is that younger people's preference for free-to-play or mobile games has less to do with brain rot or simply bad tastes, as a lot of older gamers like to accuse them of. Yes, there are technological and cultural things to consider here. Younger Gen Z and much of Gen Alpha were exposed to iPads and other mobile devices at a very young age. This has affected gaming preferences. We'll get to that later in this video. Beyond that though, young people and their parents are increasingly being priced out of the gaming industry. If you want to look for the cause of the hypothetical death of classical gaming, this is it. And the industry has willed this into being. In the 2020s, they doubled down on games for people in their 30s and 40s instead of investing in the non-gamer to gamer pipeline. The industry put too much emphasis on costly high-fidelity games that cater to a more mature audience instead of low-cost, lo-fi games. More importantly, the industry and its investors wildly misjudged the financial situation early on in the decade. They looked at the grossly optimistic growth forecasts of the early 2020s, you know, when everyone was stuck at home, and decided that they should bet the house on the ponies. Then they looked at the spike in consumer tolerance for inflation in the pandemic and thought that the spending party would last forever. Infuriatingly, the industry doesn't seem to be pivoting away from this strategy much. They're not overinvesting now, but with rare exceptions, prices keep going up. You can blame AI if you want, but that's not the whole story here. As a result of all this, gaming lately, and I mean lately, has started to feel less like a hobby and more like a luxury. Are we really so surprised then that free-to-play and mobile games are so popular? Wouldn't we all have the same preferences if this was the gaming environment that we grew up in? Speaking of this pesky platform, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's do it. Let's just get it over with. I want to talk about Nintendo because of the special role that they traditionally played in the gaming market. Played. Past tense. That's a key word here. Remember when I was talking about parents buying their kids a Game Boy Color in the early 2000s? The use of the Game Boy, a Nintendo product, in that example wasn't a mistake or arbitrary choice. When you look at the charts of all of the gaming consoles and their release prices adjusted by inflation, Nintendo is consistently among the cheapest. The Game Boy franchise, the DS, the Wii, the Switch Lite, and especially the GameCube are the kings of low-cost classical gaming. The pricing isn't the only thing here, though it is a big one. Nintendo has historically branded its products as kid and family-friendly. They communicate this through thoughtful marketing and product design. These same features, plus the wealth of IP in Nintendo's archives like Pokemon and Animal Crossing, have really turbocharged women's interest in gaming too. That's so much the case that one can think of cozy gaming and the Switch franchise as a hand-in-hand phenomenon. In contrast, PlayStation and especially Xbox have branded themselves as more mature platforms meant for audiences into combat-centered games. Nintendo's pricing and marketing have long sold its products as a gateway into gaming. That may not be the case anymore. It doesn't seem like Nintendo is pivoting away from its family-friendly branding, but it is dropping its family-friendly pricing. The new $500 price tag of the Switch 2 is not in line with how Nintendo has historically priced its consoles. Even the Switch 2's base design with a bigger screen and more processing power don't make a lot of sense considering its customer base. The consumer has come to expect $500 price tags from Xbox and PlayStation. But one, those products cater to a different type of gamer, a more mature and already committed one. And two, just looking at those companies' hardware sales, I'm not sure that this is something that Nintendo should be emulating. To me, a $500 price tag communicates that Nintendo wants families to game, but only if they're wealthy. Nintendo's pricing woes are a big deal because this phenomenon isn't just a problem for Nintendo. Their platforms and games play a crucial role in converting non-gamers, mainly children and adult women, into being gamers. The loss of this gateway pricing threatens the whole industry long term. Microsoft and Sony might be breathing some small sigh of relief, knowing that they have covered to keep raising their prices further. At some point though, the consumer is just going to stop buying stuff. We already see that among teens and young adults who don't have the money. Unless another gaming company develops a cheaper, child-friendly platform, or Nintendo develops a Switch 2 Lite, this critical part of the gaming pipeline will collapse. So parents' financial ability to buy consoles and games is one central piece of the story of how gamers come into existence. There are other factors though. Remember my anecdote about how fragile the non-gamer to gamer pipeline is, and that it was contingent upon certain things not existing? This is where the story gets really interesting. If you look at the cultural, technological, and social habits of children and teens now versus 20 years ago, they look very dissimilar. A lot of adult gamers now got into gaming as kids when the infrastructure of gaming was fundamentally different. In the 90s and early 2000s, the internet was slow, hard to use, expensive, and somewhat of a rarity. Only about half of US adults used the internet in some way in 2000. High-speed internet didn't become widely used until 2007. Until then, gaming was largely a solo experience you did using physical discs, or even cartridges you fed into a console or computer. Unsurprisingly, Gen X and older millennial gamers to this day prefer story-based solo gaming experiences. They're more willing to shell out $70 for Resident Evil Requiem, not just because it's a franchise that they love, but also because it matches preferences they established in childhood. The internet, or lack thereof, also affects the motivations of gamers by age group. These same older gamers often play games for completion, or mastery of a skill or gameplay loop. In other words, the game itself is the point for these players. The introduction of broadband and Wi-Fi really shifted younger gamers' preferences away from the game itself, and more towards gaming as a form of socializing. By itself, it isn't a bad thing, but it has challenged the culture of gaming. If older gamers prefer solo gaming, then younger millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha prefer multiplayer experiences. These younger players tend to care less about getting good scrub and more about interacting with friends online, making UGC, and customizing games. It's no wonder then that games like Animal Crossing New Horizons, Roblox, and Peak are more popular among younger gamers. Again, gaming as socializing isn't a bad thing. There are some red flags in this trend though. I worry that gaming as socializing is big among younger gamers because we've obliterated free or low-cost real-life spaces that kids can socialize at. We've replaced malls, libraries, playgrounds, and arcades with digital spaces filled with microtransactions. Worse yet, I don't know that socializing through webcams and mics is as good as, or even just the same as, socializing in person. I'm not opposed to social gaming, but it shouldn't replace actual socialization. You can also see how, in combination with tendencies in free-to-play and mobile gaming, social gaming starts heading towards slop territory. Speaking of, alongside the proliferation of the modern internet, we got the smartphone. If Nintendo is the king of the non-gamer to gamer pipeline that abdicated his throne, then the smartphone is the villain determined to obliterate that pipeline altogether. I've spoken at length on this channel about how smartphones, in combination with social media, don't worry, we'll get there later in this video, were a really bad thing for gaming. By smartphones, I don't mean just the phones themselves, but any mobile device such as an iPad that functions in many of the same ways. As I mentioned before, the introduction of mobile devices really upended that pipeline. When the older gamers of today were kids, we didn't have mobile devices as distractions away from gaming. It's different now. Multiple studies I looked at while doing research for this video showed that younger Gen Z, and especially Gen Alpha, have really different takes on gaming. The most obvious consequence of this is that many younger gamers now list mobile as their preferred gaming platform. Gen Alpha is a standout group here, with a shocking 93% saying they prefer mobile gaming. This trend is so potent that now a majority of Americans say that mobile is their favorite gaming device. My issue with mobile gaming is that it is just a fundamentally worse gaming experience that is designed to be exploitative and addictive. Mobile gaming is playing on an ergonomically hostile touchscreen that follows you everywhere. Unlike a console or PC, which just sits somewhere until you intentionally choose to interact with it, the mobile device is always there, lurking, like a stalker. It almost never turns off, because that would be deeply disruptive to the rest of your life. The device is so easy to pick up in a dull moment that we do it now habitually and without thinking. Not having your phone on your person becomes a point of discomfort, even panic for some. The endless scroll and deluge of apps that sit alongside gaming apps make the device hard to put down. The gaming apps themselves often beckon you to spend another hour, another dollar, just one more dollar to unlock that skin or item that will totally fix all of your life's problems, right? We explicitly acknowledge the disruptive, addictive nature of mobile games and mobile devices in general, yet weirdly we celebrate it. or at least normalize it. Take the mobile games category of the Game Awards from last year, for example.
And the Game Award goes to Umamasume Pretty Derby! All right, I think I have to take a quick break and play Umamasume. It's not my ADHD, it's professional development and my ADHD.
Host Sydney Goodman joked about needing to disrupt an entire live award ceremony just so that she could play a game on her phone. I get that it's a joke, but it does speak to the weird techno-dystopian grip that mobile devices have on us. If, like me, you dislike mobile gaming, you might fret about graphs like this that show mobile gaming's unmistakable contributions to the economic growth of gaming in the past decade. Combined with stats on younger gamers' overwhelming preference for mobile gaming, it may seem like the entire industry is moving to platformless gaming. This worry isn't entirely without evidence. After all, 90% of US adults own a smartphone, and many children and teens do too. This means that mobile gaming is so convenient relative to classical gaming. Why would a parent buy a $500 Switch 2 or a $1,200 Xbox when their kid already has a gaming device in their pocket? Furthermore, younger gamers increasingly don't identify as gamers per se, but as players of specific games. Consoles are accordingly less of the identity marker that they are for older gamers. Endless monogame experiences like Fortnite, Minecraft, and especially Roblox mean that they can spend hours, years even, playing the same game and never leaving. All around us there's chatter of cloud gaming, and not just being able to play Xbox games on your PC, but fully remote gaming that you do on your laptop or phone or TV. As the misused and partially apocryphal quote goes, you will own nothing and be happy about it. The AI-fueled silicon shortage is putting those fears into overdrive. Do Jensen Huang, Satya Nadella, and whoever else want to make PC and console gaming a DRM-infused subscription-based service? It's hard to find concrete evidence that tech and gaming CEOs want to do away with platforms that you can own altogether. There are overt moves to platformless gaming in other ways, however. Again, from the 2025 Game Awards, take this ad from Amazon's Luna. The future of gaming is linking your phone up to your TV, I guess? The intentionally family-friendly branding of this isn't lost on me. The rise of gaming on Netflix is similar here, but now it's also trying to replace physical board gaming as well. I didn't think we needed to innovate on Boggle or Pictionary, but the line must go up attention economy demands it. Digging into the details further though, I found that a lot of this evidence doesn't actually point to some inevitable mobile gaming takeover of the industry. First of all, despite all the growth that mobile gaming has contributed to the industry in the last decade, Games financial analyst Matthew Ball considers mobile gaming to be an exhausted growth engine. His 2025 report actually sheds a lot of light on how difficult it is to be successful in mobile gaming, with the number of mobile games available in stores having peaked in 2016. He specifically points to social media, and particularly TikTok, being a major competitor for gamers' attention. I can't help but wonder if having the TikTok app or whatever right next to the Roblox app is a culprit here. Ball also notes that time spent on mobile gaming among US adults has actually decreased year over year for a while now. It's incredibly hard for new mobile titles to compete with older ones, and the companies that profit the most from mobile gaming are Apple and Google through their storefronts. Keep in mind that Roblox has never been profitable. Consider the dominance of Roblox among younger gamers. For many in this age group, Roblox may well be the only game that exists. Its years-long lack of profitability doesn't exactly paint an optimistic picture for this type of gaming. As for the platformless, monogame qualities of a lot of mobile games, I wonder how much of that criticism is deserved. For starters, the cross-play platformless thing that Netflix has been doing, for example, is highly experimental and has not been particularly profitable. This may well be a short-lived trend, kind of like the Metaverse or Xbox Connect. Only time will tell. As for monogames, that's not something that Gen Z or Alpha came up with. Older gamers like to dunk on monogames popular with younger gamers like Roblox or Minecraft, which, sure. I'm not out here to try to defend Roblox, a company whose business model I find to be morally questionable to say the least. Keep in mind that Minecraft was partially popularized by older gamers though. It came out in 2011 when the oldest Gen Alpha kids weren't yet born. Looking at the top 20 games of 2025, a lot of titles read as monogames, games that players tend to play singularly and endlessly, given new seasons, UGC, esports content, or additions. There's Roblox, Minecraft, and Fortnite for the youth, but then Counter-Strike 2, League of Legends, and Black Ops 7 for the older players. Classical console players are actually contributing to monogame culture, regardless of age. Players on consoles like Xbox and PlayStation tend to play the same top 20 titles over and over again, while PC gamers tend to play more diverse titles. So really, while a lot of preferences and habits of younger gamers look different from those of older gamers, there are more similarities between generations than meet the eye. You don't have to like it, but it is true. One final thing to consider here is that no habit or trend is permanent. Fortnite, once the game among Gen Z and younger millennials, is now struggling to grow, or at least stop bleeding its player count. Epic, the developer behind the game, has engaged in major layoffs, and there's a lot of uncertainty around the game now. Where preferences change and gamers start to look for new experiences, there are opportunities. Is it possible for game studios with a long-time focus on deep, story-based gaming to lure monogame players into a different gameplay style? This won't necessarily look the same as classical gaming has for the past 20 to 30 years. It also doesn't mean that Gen Z's and Gen Alpha's preferences have sealed the fate of gaming. That brings me to one final thing that has been driving a wedge between generations on gaming: social media. This particular innovation has brought the attention economy into focus like nothing else. Time is money, as they say, and social media companies want as much of your time as possible. Your time and attention mean your views, clicks, and data that they can harvest and resell to the highest bidder. It means more products sold through their platforms, which have pivoted away from socializing and have become one endless advertisement. Why would people game, puzzle through things, or create things when they can just consume endless dopamine-dispensing content? I already noted that TikTok has been a major competitor for gamers' attention. It might be the fastest growing social media platform of the past 6 years or so, but it's not alone. YouTube is actually a huge competitor here. Oops. The gaming industry incorrectly thought that people would stay locked into gaming after the pandemic retreated. In contrast, social media appears to have permanently broken people's brains. Or has it? A decade of bad press on social media's many antisocial tendencies, punctuated by the general malaise of AI, has ushered in unprecedented backlash against big tech. I think it's important to mention social media and AI side by side, but not just because of how inundated social media is with AI slop. There is also strong overlap between the social media companies and the AI companies. A lot of people are aware that many of the same tech bros that landed us into our terminally online state are now insisting that somehow AI is both the future and the end. The signs of resistance abound, and in many ways I didn't expect, given humanity's penchant for techno-fatalism. Many AI data centers are getting canceled or delayed, in part because communities are starting to say no. Declines in basic literacy have become a major talking point, and many US adults are expressing strong desire to read more. Younger people, and Gen Z in particular, are shunning devices and screens in favor of tangible books and music. Tech, culture, and fashion from the 90s is really popular right now, which is totally tubular. Gen Z also uses AI the most, but also hates it the most. In fact, the more people use AI and become more AI literate, the less they trust it. I think there's immense opportunity here in gaming. I think about that Game Boy Color often. It cost $69. It didn't connect to the internet unless you went through a lot of trouble. Younger gamers may discover retro gaming, and in many ways they are, through Steam, GOG, and other stores that have protected that IP through the decades. Software doesn't solve the hardware crunch though. But what if, for example, Nintendo re-released the Game Boy Color, or a remastered version of it to help us get through the silicon shortage? I highly doubt that data centers need 8-bit processing power, and the kids are all about 90s tech. Reframing this thought experiment, what if we learned from the past without totally mimicking it? I get that Nintendo's weirdness about its IP means that this will never happen, but we need bold ideas like this now more than ever. What can we learn from ourselves, how we got into gaming, to help bring newer gamers into the fold? How do we do that in a way that meets the economic and cultural moment that we're in? To be clear, I don't think that trying to force us to figuratively go back in time is a good or realistic idea. I do think that the line must go up, constantly innovating mentality of late-stage capitalism is clearly broken at this point, however. If the gaming industry keeps thinking this way, it's just going to lead to more bad games, fewer players, and bigger layoffs. While the gaming industry struggles on how to get out of this mess, there are things that classical gamers can do to help the non-gamer to gamer pipeline. Instead of selling that old console that's been lying around, maybe that can go to a kid in your life as a gift. I'd love to see a wave of new Switch 2 owners giving away their original Switches to younger folks for free, for example. Alternatively, if you have a friend who's into mobile gaming, you might talk to them about consoles if it's an affordable thing for them. Anecdotally, a friend of mine who previously only played Stardew Valley on an iPad now owns a Switch 2 and proudly identifies as a cozy gamer. That's because she had a number of friends, myself included, who talked to her over the years about getting a Switch at some point. I think classical gamers also need to invest time and energy into changing cultural perceptions around gaming. Too many people think it's a mind-numbing, brainless hobby. Based on all the slot games out there, I don't blame them. But quality, age-appropriate games might help kids embrace creativity, build confidence, and yes, socialize with other kids. It might also help keep kids connected to tech and the digital world without relying on social media or AI. If I ever have kids, I'd way rather they have a console than a smartphone. You probably feel that way too. It's up to people like us to explain to others why we feel that way. As always, thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.